I'd like to invite people to share maybe 3 or 4, just a headline from your conversation. A headline is a sentence. It's not longer than that. Just something that really jumped out from the conversation you had with your partner. Yeah. Can you want to shout it out, or I can bring it up to you? All right, shout.
Thank you. We were discussing from very diverse perspectives, transportation planner and cultural heritage management specialist who also teaches. And one of the things that I think comes out as a question, not a sentence or statement, but a question is that in the light of the morning's discussion that communities are now mobile, hence we can't hide behind consensual decisions, because when community changes, the consensus changes. What kind of physical infrastructure can we provide for cultural heritage sites like the ones we saw in this panel that cross boundaries, whether they are state boundaries, linguistic boundaries, national boundaries, because there's a lot of world regions where sites are across nations, and one nation is not interested. And I think that Professor Richard showed us an example where the government of Mexico is not interested in those sites. So what kind of infrastructure can we think of, but not a intangible infrastructure, a physical infrastructure that goes beyond intangibility of consensus?
Thank you for that point. I'm going to ask the panel to think about that and think about answering it in a minute, but maybe 1 or 2 other headlines from the conversation, George.
Yes, me and my partner have been having very extensive discussions. The discussions were not necessarily on what you asked us to do, but what emerged out of the discussions that we've had. I think it's across the board, all of them. The issue of language as a means of communication. And also in Africa, where we've had some meetings for the preparation of the 40th anniversary, when we talk about community. What exactly do we mean by community? Is it community or are they communities? When we say a community, are we excluding ourselves or are we part of the community? For example, when Richard goes to work in Mexico, can he be seen as a part of a research community? So he may be a stakeholder, but his stake is a little bit smaller than the stake of the people who are there. So I think the issue of community should also not just be taken as an obvious. I think we need to look at that. But what we discussed was the issue of language. How do you translate to the local person on the ground what outstanding universal value is? Because for them, the site that they are in, that you are telling them is of outstanding universal value, is part and parcel of their life. And so what would you say? So we also need to develop a language that we can communicate, and vice versa. How do we communicate with the local language to the global community who have developed their own big languages of conservation, preservation, tolerance, and all these big languages? How do we make sure that they also understand the language that is homegrown, that is based on the ground? And then lastly is on let me give an example of the Pueblo, which was, I think the issue of language came there very, 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 very powerful also. How are the children whom we are protecting this heritage for, are they dreaming in the Pueblo language? Are they thinking in that Pueblo language? And if they are not, what are we doing to ensure that they can be able to understand all these values that you talked about, the stewardship and all that, that they will be able to see the same that you are seeing now in that heritage? I wanted to comment on Richard's, and also, but I think I will stop there. And also on the construction in Australia.
These are great points. Thank you. And what I think I want to do before we bring it back out to the group here is to invite the panel to respond. There's been a lot put on the table here related to language, related to how do you make outstanding universal values, or how do you OUV become meaningful to those living in the place, this question of infrastructure and physical infrastructure that protects heritage. So I'm going to turn it over to the panel for some response.
Which part?
And I'll jump up at once.
Which part?
I'll say not answer the physical infrastructure, but in a nice way, maybe. And this deals with the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor. I don't know how many of you know about what the Heritage Corridor concept is, but essentially if you get $1 million for 10 years, up to $1 million for 10 years from the federal government, but there are stipulations for that within 3 years you must have a management plan and a commission defined to help manage that area. And so as the management plan just came out 1 month ago, and as you can imagine, across 4 states with their own perception of things, and I think there are 22 counties, maybe more than that, and then I think there's over 120 communities in that all course have their biggest focus is not actually on physical infrastructure, it's on that management framework that can work and guide at all scales. So this is what I mean by it's a non-physical answer, but it actually is kind of a stepping stone, because it is very much about people, and it's very much about relationships and interactions, at least from their perception. So they really have to get that management infrastructure figured out first, and then they can move on to physical infrastructure from the Gullah Geechee corridor perspective.
Let me just make a couple of quick comments. There's too much on my plate here already, but just the very first comment about the physical aspects of heritage, which sort of ties to what George is talking about, I think. I mean, it is, in many respects, Mexico acknowledges this war, but does not acknowledge it as a rebellion. And what really is complicated is that it is both of the past and of the present, as is Mexico in many respects, and as are these communities. And in some sense, it comes back to George talking about communities. I mean, in some sense, it is to say that since heritage is so invested in the construct of identity, that the chances of Mexico allowing this discourse to become a major discourse on an international plane is just not viable. I mean, Mexico doesn't want to see it that way, and that's what federal governments kind of do. I mean, they create the story of who they are and who people within their boundaries are, and that's sort of what happens. And there's always contention, but this is also issues of economic power that are built into this. So it's structured along the lines of the ability perhaps of the community to both save these things, going back to what George was talking about, to actually physically, to create the framework of wanting to save these sites out in the jungle, for no reason. I mean, there was no particular statement of anything that I heard other than to simply say, this is part of who we are, we save it, it's on our land, and that's it. And we know that this was the hacienda of one of our leaders, and we will put his statue up in the center of our town. But it is the community. So the answer, perhaps in some sense, is that heritage as much has to come away from just the federal statement or the national construct, or even the international construct, which talks about this construct of universal value, down into the community, which is not about universal value, but about community value, which is very different. And what is a community? I've been struggling. I don't know. I would like to answer easily to you and neatly, but at the same time, the word community is very malleable and wonderful in many respects. The question you ask is, am I part of that community? Both yes and no. I'm certainly not part of the community at one level, but yes, because I've spent enough time there and people know who I am. But at any time, I could be kicked out of that community. They could say that you're not welcome here anymore to do, we've invited you in. And what I was doing beforehand was literally just visiting. And I didn't rent a house until they invited me to rent a house in the town. And I waited 2 years. I commuted during the months that I was there every day to an hour away to the nearest hotel. Because I didn't want to be there until they invited me, because I felt it was not my right. So I don't know, but I think it has to be shifted. The construct has to be shifted. I mean, the conversations that we have are wonderful, are interesting, but in some sense they don't have any impact upon what this community is doing or trying to do or thinking about. Do they, I mean, are they aware of international heritage issues? Of course. I mean, some of them are very, few of them are on the web there. They don't have much access to the internet. But so the answer is both yes at one level, but no at another level. I'm sorry, I'm going on.
I'd like to ask maybe Damien to talk about not just community, but also this question of the World Heritage aspiration of your community. And Teresa, you've done so much on language. It would be great if you would respond on that point.
With our community down in the far southwest of Victoria, it's actually the birthplace of Victoria. That's when the first European settlers got there and set up their farms and all that. They came up from Tasmania or Van Diemen's Land, so they were there officially from 1834. Hayward is a little town of 1,500 people. It has the highest proportion of an Indigenous population in the state of Victoria. There's about 150 of us, who are all family. And that's just on my Aboriginal side. On my father's side, on the white side, that's the rest of the population, of course. When we decided about 10 years ago to develop the Buds Rim landscape sustainably for our own prosperity, we had to do that in partnership with the broader community. The broader community had been going through their young people leaving. They were having population decreases of about 10% of people per year, shire or local government area. For us, we had sort of sat back and thought, well, if for us to be to have prosperity, we need to live in a prosperous community. And what was happening was farming is declining. The big corporate farms are coming in, taking over, particularly with dairies and with blue gum plantations. Over the past 10 years, we've had about 90,000 hectares of farmland, agricultural land, taken up by blue gum plantations. So we had to work out what we were going to do, and more importantly, we had to work out what kind of language we're going to use, because given the history of invasion and deep dispossession and retaliation and all that, we had to work out what language we're going to use. So we decided to use the language of sustainable development, those common goals, those values, all in equal parts. So as an Aboriginal community, we put our vision out there to the broader community, and then we went out consulting with the broader community. We call the non-Aboriginal community the broader community, because when we say wider community, people thinking we're saying whiter community, but they're not all white. So we have to say broader. So we did up the presentation. A couple of us are qualified in natural resources management. We talk about sustainable development. We went out to the broader community, to farmyards, to here, to there, to talk about sustainable development. And this is in 2004. And the reaction from the audience was a complete blank. They didn't know what sustainable development was. They didn't know. They didn't know about economic value. They didn't know how to work out your economic value with your environmental value, with your cultural and social values. They didn't know what that phrase meant, and that was just a shock. That really, it shocked us, kicked us fair in the arse, it did. We had to sit back and deconstruct all the sophistication around sustainable development back to a non-Aboriginal learning style for these farmers to pick it up. It was unreal. Now they're a lot better at it, lot better at it. When we come to the restoration of Lake Condah, we enjoyed about 100% of community support, government support. They're all there for it. as you can see, we got it done. We got it done properly, ticking off all the heritage boxes we had to, plus our own aspirations. And I suppose as a reflection of our Aboriginal community's leadership, they've now voted one of our Gunditjmara elders onto the local government council. He's the first one ever to do that. That's happened over the past 4 years he's been on there. The elections for the next 4-year term are actually coming up in 2 weekends away. And the job I have now is sort of, you could see that as a reflection as well, because I suppose we have a set of values as Gunditjmara people that want to better our community by properly developing what we have, our cultural assets, and people are picking up, the broader community are picking that up as something that they want and want to learn from. So for as strange and as shocking as it is, it's a good thing. What was the other bit? Or I'll pass on.
I'd like to give Teresa a chance to respond on the question of language.
On language, well, language is a very fundamental piece of what we do in preservation. One cannot exist without the other. It's why, for me personally, it was easy for me to make the transition from working in a language program, a language revitalization program, into what we now formally call a historic preservation program there at the Pueblo. It's important in many different ways. When you look at the historical context of where Indigenous people have been here in the United States, and the ideals that existed centuries ago of the thought that many of our Native people would not exist into the century, many of the archives, the photographs, the recordings, the documentation were meant simply to capture the last remnants of Native peoples here in the United States, because the idea was they weren't going to make it. Part of that process throughout history was also to eliminate the use of Native languages. It is why Native communities to this day still fight English-only laws, because it is in that language, in our traditional languages, that give us the connection to place, that give us the connection to the past, to words from a long time ago, languages and traditions and ceremony that existed thousands and thousands of years ago. But in the same sense of what we're talking about with language, language can also be a barrier. When we are talking about, in our most broadest terms, about preservation and conservation, when we talk about saving places, when we're using English only and not finding ways to connect to Indigenous communities, we are somehow putting one thought over the other, as opposed to asking Indigenous communities, tribal communities, to say, here is something that we are thinking about. Do you have something similar in your own community that might be equivalent to what we are all trying to accomplish? Many tribes and Indigenous communities have their own inherent ways that are centuries old, of protecting and preserving and managing these landscapes. But sometimes we can inadvertently go into communities and bring these ideas forward, and without having that discussion in that native tongue, we can sometimes, if we're not careful, limit their power and their ability to manage those resources. And so language becomes a real critical factor in all of this. But it also becomes critical in the sense that, yes, younger generations, that we have a huge shift, not just here in the United States, but across the world, where technology and English, this invasion of the outside world comes into our homes. I had to be grateful to my parents when I was young because we were the first family in our village that had a little black and white TV. And my parents knew that that was a luxury item. My father ironically worked for the mines, the uranium mines, and with that money he bought a black and white TV. But we were limited. My parents knew because it was such a new thing, but they knew the power of it, that they limited our time and our interaction with that television. They forced us out the door because that was really our world. Now technology is such that all you do is flip on a switch, or you have your iPods, your little recording devices. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. So indigenous communities are feeling the pressure of this influx of technology, this sharing of information, and while it can be a very powerful tool to convey a message, it also can provide a negative sense in that no longer are our young people wanting to connect with the outdoors and to those places where we make pilgrimage. No longer is there the desire to make the sacrifice to walk to these shrines or places of importance, because you can Google it, you can look it up on a map. You don't have to walk there anymore. You don't have to pick up a rock. You don't have to touch the tree. You don't have to stand there and feel the wind in your face. It's too convenient. I did that even here when I came here the other night. It would have been easier for me to pick up a map and figure out my location. But I wanted to see. I wanted to walk the streets, even though most, if I had told my mother, she probably said, don't you be doing that, it's not safe. But there is something in connecting with space and with people, that ability to walk someplace new. I'm not taking back a photograph when I come back home. When I go back to my community, I'm gonna tell them what the buildings look like, what the cold air felt like on my face, what I smelt, the sound of a siren, the sound of a bus, the people talking around me, the smells that change from Vietnamese food to a fast food chain to, you know, a grill, the smell of a steak wafting out of a pub. That's what I take back. Those are the senses, the connections that give me the material then to use my language and take that experience back into community. It's that language that allows you to connect to that sense of place. It is then that sense of place that we can begin to have that dialogue to say, these are why places are important. Whether they're cultural landscapes, urban landscapes, whether they're buildings or structures, that's what connects us, the glue that binds us.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you for reminding us of the importance of the sense of place. I think we have a few more minutes before the tea break, and so we have time for maybe one or two more questions or really one-sentence comments, and I'm going to send the mics to the back because we haven't been hearing from people in the back, but I see two right there. Very long cord here.
This is our short summary from our neighbor conversation, but it relates to a number of your groups. In preserving cultural landscape, where you talk of the importance of transmitting values, and in specific instances, craft, you know, relearning eel fishing, relearning palmetto grass building. What happens if everybody in that community grows up and wants to be an IT specialist or a nurse? How do you enforce the members of a community to partake in traditional activities? You don't force them, but how do you deal with that?
No, we do force them. No. With the transmission of knowledge, in Australia, particularly over the past 20 years, we've had the native title. It came out of the Mabo decision from 1992, and then it was enacted with the Commonwealth Act, and basically Aboriginal communities had to prove themselves to, you know, to another community who has never had to prove themselves. But over that, with that, what we had to go through the court, through the federal court, you know, we had the federal court come down, and the Federal Court of Australia come down and set up on country, and we had the state's lawyers, the state's barristers. They were all there questioning us, how was knowledge transmitted, you know, and in the Australian government and the state government's view, that transmission of knowledge had to come directly from your parent, from your grandparent, from all that, a direct lineage of knowledge, which, as Gunditj Mara, we were lucky we had that. We were lucky that had not been impacted on. We were lucky that had not been stolen. But gee, it pissed us off. What that transmission of knowledge, the most important thing is the knowledge, and how it comes down to care for country is the essence of what country is. When for a while there, we had all the new recording equipment, we went recording our elders, and we did that for about 5 years until our elders got tired of us recording them and said, no more, get away. So we thought, well, what can we do? The grant money report's due, what are we going to do here? So we put an ad in the paper, and we went out for non-Aboriginal people with an association with Lake Condah, an old association with Lake Condah, for us to record them. And it opened our eyes up marvellously. It broadened our view about there being two sides to the story of Lake Condah and Budge Bim. It broadened our view of what we need to do to achieve our World Heritage nomination. We looked at the cultural resources, not only of Gunditj Mara people, but of non-Aboriginal people. And to me, those older non-Aboriginal people, and we're talking about people 90, 95 years old, having their story valued was incredible for them. They'd sit there in tears saying, how come you love our story? And we say, well, because it's a story of country. It means something. In their own cultural world, they didn't have that value. They felt that value, but it wasn't something spoke outside of, I suppose, them being squatters and all that they've had lumped on them as being squatters and dispossessing Aboriginal people of their land. But when they had Aboriginal people sitting down valuing their story of their land, it was really good. Another sort of story, there's an old white fellow who lives down that way now, and the way he smokes eels and the way he cuts the eel was always perfect. You wouldn't have the oil wouldn't collect up the bottom of the tail when you're smoking your eel. He taught us this trick and all that, and he never told us for about 5 years that it was our great-grandfather that taught him that. He thought because of native title and all the blues that caused, we nearly missed that story from our own grandfather via an old white fella. So it was the transmission of knowledge. Let it out, let it free. To share the stories, to protect the story.
Thank you. Okay, we had one more point in the back, and then we're going to have to wrap up and go into the coffee and tea break.
Thank you very much indeed for your interesting presentations. My question is related to tourism. I was curious to know your point of view on this. Is tourism considered a powerful tool to preserve and develop values, traditions, and landscapes and sites, or on the contrary, sometimes it destroys some values and shifts the attention of people in creating, in working and trying to do things that are appealing to tourists. And so just wanted to know your view on this. Thank you.
I could be quick if I can. With tourism, we come up with our own construct of tourism. When visitors come to our country, they're guests on our country, and we have to treat them as guests. We have been through, for the past 10 years, we've been developing what we have. And only last year that the Commonwealth Government put out a new product gap analysis for the Great Ocean Road. And on that they what are they called? They evaluated and they tiered what needed to be done. They're going to upgrade the upgrade the airport at Geelong to an international airport. They're going to build $130 million interpretive centre at Lockhart Gorge on the Great Ocean Road. And they say that they're going to provide $55 million for us to do Lake Condah Budge Bim. They say that, right? When they send the cash in the bag, we'll be right. But with sustainable tourism, we're very serious about it. There's only so much traffic our landscape can handle. There's only so many Gunditj Mara that can go around. We, as a community, and our elders are very strict on us, we're not to have those, we're not allowed to have those timed performances where, you know, if you turn up at 2 o'clock, there'll be a dance. For us, our priority is to have Gunditj Mara people out caring for country, eeling. We won't make $1 million off our eeling, but we'll put it in context to the broader Budge Bim experience. Ultimately, we want sustainable tourism to allow Gunditj Mara people to be out on country, to be growing eels, to be weaving, to be dancing, to be singing, to be speaking language, at the same time wanting to become, you know, doctors, lawyers, and all that kind of stuff. It should be possible. They're our goals with sustainable tourism. And like I said, if we make $1 million out of it, or $1 billion out of it, sweet. But if it's just enough to get us by, that's all right as well.
If there's a very quick further response from anyone. Yeah, okay, Teresa, please.
Just real quickly to the tourism question, from an economic standpoint, yes, it can be very good for communities like my Pueblo. The Pueblo of Acoma does do tourism year-round. On the downside of that, there come all the ripple effects, the ramifications of having people come into a community like the Pueblo, which was not meant to sustain thousands of people who come during the year. Right now, actually, now that I'm here, is actually not a good time to visit the Pueblo. We have an influx of folks who go out to the International Balloon Fiesta out in New Mexico. And once they're done in the morning, all of those visitors come to the Pueblo. And so we have an influx of people. So you have the traffic, you have the trash, you have the waste. All of those things are byproducts of people coming to visit the Pueblo, which then gets left at the Pueblo, and then the Pueblo bears the responsibility of then dealing with those products. One of the pictures that was in my presentation that I didn't highlight, though, came out of addressing one of those concerns. And the Pueblo of Acoma recently finished a $1.5 million project. It's a pilot project to test out waterless, self-contained composting toilets. We did that project with, in conjunction with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It was supported. It took a long time. It wasn't a project that came quickly, but after many years of dialogue and looking at the impacts of tourism on our community, because we have no water, we were able to get support for that project as well as governmental support for that project. And so I can say now that we have successfully had one complete year of use of those units, and now we have the community as well as our guests asking for more. So there are places where we can find good outcomes. So come visit us.
I have, and it's an absolutely beautiful place. Great. Well, I want to thank our panelists for their excellent presentations and also for their thoughtful comments, and thank all of you for participating in the dialogue.